Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Body Podcast with your postnatal expert Peter Lapp. That, as always, will be me. This week I am talking, in a nice and brief episode, I'm talking about some of the basics of postpartum exercise, such as how diastasis recti can cause knee pain. I touch on the idea that diastasis recti cannot be healed or is more difficult to heal when you're still breastfeeding, which is nonsense, of course. I talk about the role of relaxin, the hormone you might have heard about a little bit. I know I mentioned that before, but now we're talking about what happens with that postpartum and why that is very unlikely to have an effect on your diastasis recti. And there's a nice in the news this week about throwing plastic in the microwave or in the oven and all that sort of stuff. Does it really cause cancer? Is that really what this new study said, right? Anyways, it'll be fun. Here we go. Hey, welcome to the Healthy Postnatal Body Podcast. This is the episode for the 10th of July 2022. And it's just me and little Kitty today. The rest of the gang are all downstairs. It's like 23, 24 degrees and sunny in Edinburgh, so it's way too warm to do anything. But of course, little Kitty can't be in a room without me. So she's with me because she's a good girl. And the rest, not so much. I hope you're really well. This is the first I've done by myself for a little while. Don't worry, there are more interviews coming up. I've got a whole raft of interviews lined up. But this is me just by myself, so I thought I'd address some of the basics. To be fair, I was struggling for any subject matter. So what I did, as I always do when I struggle, I asked Jess what she's come across. And the wonderful Jessica Frower braves the diastasis recti support forums. She's a member of all these things. God love her. And maybe you are as well. What do I know? But if you listen to the podcast regularly, you know I'm not a big fan of these things. But Jess is very kind and she sends me some things that have cropped up and I despair immediately. But it means I have something to talk about. So, if there was no misinformation out there, I wouldn't have anything to talk about today. Couple of things about diastasis recti. And I wrote about this before, I think in like 2019 or 18 or something like that, so years ago. Someone asked a question on one of the support forums about knee pain and hip pain and all that sort of stuff. And are they linked to diastasis recti? And of course, the answers were all over the place. But the main thing is that, yes, they are. So let's look at hip pain and all that sort of thing first. Obviously during the pregnancy, a couple of things happen. Your body makes room for the baby to come out and relaxin, one of the hormones, and we'll come back to this later on as well, starts flowing through your body, and everything that needs to relax and shift does exactly that, right? So that means your hip moves slightly, as well as the ligaments holding everything in place start to ease off a bit. And that means that can cause a bit of movement in the hip area where otherwise there'd be no movement. Now you add to that you're building a human, and that sits on your pelvic floor for quite a while, and that pressure is constant. So something kind of has to give, as I said before. And now, as soon as you've given birth, that of course that human is gone, and that pressure is off the hips, but that relaxin is still going through your body. Apologies, as my chair makes a lot of noise. So that relaxin takes a bit of time to leave the body. So that hip pain is quite common. So the best thing to do for that is strengthen up the hip muscles, strengthen up your adductors, your abductors, your hip flexors, and all that sort of stuff. And you will find that the hip pain tends to go away fairly quickly. It doesn't tend to last all that long. This is different from pelvic girdle pain, right? I'm just talking about normal hip pain. pelvic girdle pain, we've done a full episode on already, I think, a while ago. So the knee pain, because this was the interesting thing about what this lady was asking, the knee pain is slightly trickier. Knee pain, if it's like a sharp pain in the joint, can be caused by diastasis recta, or at least by being postpartum, but in a very roundabout and indirect way. Basically, if your glutes and hamstrings aren't firing up properly, you can have something called hamstring dysfunction, and that can be then the pain will be a sharpish pain. Then it's a pain I come across a lot. A sharpish pain, which is not chronic, but it feels like it's like behind the kneecap to the inside of the leg, near the top of the knee, rather than the bottom. And you find that happens quite a lot during exercises like step-ups and all that sort of stuff, or when you're walking upstairs, basically, that sort of thing. So where you're putting a lot of pressure on one leg, and therefore that travels through the knees. Now, you can fix that, right? Because that's usually caused by weak glutes or hamstring problems, like I said. So if you then just, as in any postpartum program will tackle this, if you do your glute and hamstring exercises, then you will find that you strengthen everything up. And that then means that, first of all, your glutes and the hamstrings fire up again, and you strengthen them up. It means that knee pain will go away. So yes, it will be caused by being postpartum, and to some extent by diastasis recta, because your glutes are obviously part of any diastasis recta issues and alignment issues. But that doesn't mean that it is directly caused by diastasis recta, but there's definitely a link. Right, that's Kitty pants in the background, by the way, just in case you're thinking, what's that panting noise? It's Kitty, because the room is quite warm. The poor thing is struggling a little bit. Like I said, I wrote about this a while ago. If you would like to go to the website and check out the blog and all that sort of stuff, there's some links in there and all that sort of stuff that will allow you can follow that and look at some exercises that will work, things like glute kicks and all that sort of thing. The interesting bit that's come up a lot on the support forums are relaxin and the role of relaxin postpartum. Now, like I said, relaxin is a hormone that is always present, but to almost negligible levels in the human body until you fall pregnant and the body prepares for giving birth and for growing human and all that sort of stuff. And then relaxin shoots up the levels of relaxin. Now, that takes 4 to 5 months. Depending on which researcher you believe, it could also be 12 months for those levels to go back to normal. A lot of stuff currently on the support forums and through various articles, blog posts by personal trainers. I've seen some personal trainers, not postnatal specialists, but personal trainers, some mummy bloggers, as they themselves call themselves. Write about the role of relaxin as well, saying that if you're breastfeeding, your relaxin levels are higher, which is debatable. I haven't come across a single study that shows that it is definitely at levels that are elevated enough to have an impact. Yes, relaxin, some sources say that relaxin levels are elevated in the body postpartum as long as you're breastfeeding. So it's 4 to 5 months if you're not breastfeeding, and then a bit longer, maybe even when you're breastfeeding. But that's at elevated levels. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's at high enough levels to actually impact any sort of postpartum recovery. There's always a difference, right? This stuff is not... Like I said, when I say it's not established, I really mean that. There isn't a single thing that shows that this is the case. So that breastfeeding raises, that keeps your relaxin levels up to such an extent that diastasis recta recovery becomes more difficult, and any sort of postpartum recovery becomes more difficult. My experience, tells me that it's nonsense. I've had people come to me 6 weeks postpartum when the relaxin levels are obviously still relatively high, whether you're breastfeeding or not. And 8 weeks later, we've completely managed to sort their diastasis recti. Relaxin has a really big impact during pregnancy on things, but the levels drop significantly postpartum. Just because something stays elevated doesn't mean that it stays at a level that it impacts everything. I find that on a lot of these support forums, the problem isn't hormonal. The problem isn't that the physio don't know what they're doing. In some cases it'll be the case, but it's unlikely that the physio gave the wrong exercises. It's that you don't do the exercises or you don't do them correctly. I have never, ever in the 10 plus years of doing this, basically doing everything postpartum, as in by specializing in postpartum exercise and postpartum recovery, I have never really come across anyone that did their exercises in the way that we asked them, the way that we asked them to, that could not recover from diastasis recti with the effort that they had to put in. And it can be 12 weeks, 16 weeks, however long. I'm not saying put the time frame on it, but I have never come across anyone that said, once I gave up breastfeeding, all of a sudden the relaxin levels dropped to 0 and my diastasis recti healed. I've trained breastfeeding moms, I've trained non-breastfeeding moms, and they could all recover because they put the effort in. It's very easy to forget that everybody has to put a different level of effort in. It has nothing to do with whether you're breastfeeding or not. It is extremely debatable. But I'm being very nice because I don't want to say that it's 100% not true that relaxing causes issues for people. But it is extremely debatable that it does. There is admittedly, postpartum research is a bit of a minefield. With regards to, not a lot of studies get done. It's not a very profitable field, and most institutions, even NCT and all that, don't really give a crap about what happens to women postpartum. So there aren't many people doing serious research into this with large numbers of test subjects and all that sort of stuff. And even diastasis recti. Clinical diastasis recti research is a relatively new field, not for postpartum specialists, but more for postpartum for scientists looking into it and all that sort of stuff. Nobody really gives a crap. You know this, right? If you listen to this podcast, it's one of my pet peeves. Nobody really cares about postpartum recovery from a female perspective. That's only starting to change now, and that's why there's a lot of stuff floating out there now that are at best speculative theories. So will relaxin hinder my postpartum recovery? My experience says no. The studies that I've read, most of them were done in animal studies, and relaxin is a completely different beast in animal studies because not everybody produces relaxin in the same way and all that sort of stuff. Not every species produces relaxin in the same way. So I would argue that no, it doesn't have the impact that people claim they have. And it's a little bit similar. I'm trying to segue into the next bit. A bit similar to what Court mentioned last week. The thing with the nutritionist last week about polycystic ovary syndrome. And Court Garfoot, the nutritionist that I had on last week, pointed out something really, really important with regards to kefir and other probiotics and vitamin supplements and all that sort of stuff. Is that those things do very little when your overall diet is horrible. Right? if you get 90% of your stuff wrong, what you do 10% of the time has very little impact. Now, admittedly, if 90% of it is neutral, then 10% good stuff has an impact. But if 90% is wrong, then that 10% has very little impact. And that's kind of what Cord was pointing out. If you have kefir every morning, you throw a couple of million good bacteria, so to speak, into your belly, but there's billions of bad ones in there. So therefore, it doesn't really work, right? You need to sort your diet out so that the billions of bad ones become billions of reasonable ones. And then when you add some good ones to it, it's like, it says, yay, more of the good guys, right? And in a roundabout way, that's how postpartum exercise works as well. If you don't do your exercises, you can blame it on relaxing all you want, that your diastasis recti doesn't recover, doesn't heal. But it is nonsense. It's the same as with prolactin, the breastfeeding hormone, which does cause one or two issues postpartum, but mainly to do with postpartum weight loss. Because as I've mentioned before, prolactin is the hormone that helps you breastfeed, but it usually comes with an extra 5 or 10 pounds of weight. And therefore, that is something that I always say, weight loss doesn't really happen during breastfeeding as such. Weight loss happens once you stop breastfeeding. That last 5 to 10 pounds usually doesn't come off until you stop breastfeeding. And that's completely fine. Right? I'm not saying you should be losing that weight or you should be breastfeeding. So that weight should stay on because that is how it's supposed to be. If you're feeding another human, you need more reserves. That is just basic biology. As in, it really is biology 101. If you see a dog that has just given birth, it's going to be a little bit heavier for a few months whilst it's still breastfeeding and all that. Because it's supposed to feed other things. So that prolactin has an impact. And that could well have an impact on diastasis recti, depending on where you store that weight and all that sort of stuff. But again, never to an extent that your diastasis recti cannot heal and get most of the way there. I actually think it can almost always heal completely, to be honest. I'm very much in the 99% camp. If you listen to this, and I always say this, I firmly believe that all diastasis recti, 99% of all diastasis recti can be healed by exercise. There are just varying levels of effort you have to put in. Right, this has already taken longer than I thought it was going to take, to be honest. We're 17 minutes in. A little bit of in the news. In the news this week, it's interesting. I came across this thing which was released this year. Where was this? Received. Published 28th of Feb 2022. So it's 4 or so months old. But I only came across it recently as someone sent it over to me. This is about the release of microplastics from reusable kitchen plasticware and the generation of thermal potential toxic degradation products in the oven. Basically, they were looking at whether plastic bowls and utensils for food preparation release microplastics in the food that turn carcinogenic when heated. And the debate was sent to me saying, oh God, you should really use wood, metal, glassware instead. And this study is a very clear example of the difference between the study and the headline. So the headline is, using plastic bowls and utensils for food preparation releases microplastics into the food that turn carcinogenic when heated. So plastics cause cancer. And that is not at all what the study claims. As in, it is miles removed from what the study claims. Basically what happened, and I will link to the study, of course I will. The researchers took 6 plastic bowls, hit them with an electric hand mixer, collected the microplastics that generated, because you caused some damage, and they checked to see how much they collected. Now, an electric hand mixer is going to generate a lot more particles than most other food preparation methods, such as just whipping by hand and all this sort of, using a whisk. It's a lot less damaging to a bowl than, say, the electric hand mixers. They then took some of the plastic bowls, ground them to a powder, and heated them up to see what they decompose to at temperatures of like 200 Celsius, 250 Celsius. Which is 400 Fahrenheit, 475 Fahrenheit for you American people. And what they found was completely expected. Right? If you chop up plastic, you have lots of tiny bits, so they're not an intact bowl anymore. You chop them up into loads of tiny little bits, and you melt the plastic. That's not good for you. So the polymers they break down into the super simpler molecules, and that's of an air temperature, so not the temperatures reached inside the foods and all that sort of stuff. That is just basically the plastics were turned into mush in the oven, and then we're like, what does this break down into? And amazingly enough, plastic is not healthy, especially not when you heat it. That is not the same as heating plastic, warming plastic in an oven, putting plastic in an oven in a plastic bowl in the oven causes cancer in your food. It releases microplastics into food. Right? They basically said the final paragraph says that by comparing particle amounts and hazard classification of main components, we deduce that LDPE seems to be the safest plastic to use in a common household mixing bowl. So basically they had look at 6 bowls and they said this is the safest one. Apart from acetaldehyde, which is damaging to organs in higher concentration, its components are not as hazardous in comparison. It is not evident whether these substances volatilize English in the oven or accumulate in foodstuffs through absorption or adsorption or absorption. Right? As already mentioned, no conclusive toxicological assessment. Toxicological. Jesus, it's really apologies. Just reading English is just it's. I'm going to blame it on it being too warm rather than me being too too stupid to read properly. As already mentioned, no conclusive toxicological assessment can be given yet, since for this dose the exposure times of the intake and the bioaccumulation in the organism of the resulting substances would have to be considered. Thus, studies on the add and absorbed or bound substances in the prepared food would have to be carried out, which should be addressed in future research work. Basically what they're saying is, guys, if we heat it individually, just the plastic, that is not going to be healthy to eat, but that is just us heating the plastic. That doesn't mean that it spreads to the food stuff, and it definitely doesn't mean that it spreads to the food stuff in levels that is going to kill you. Right? So, should you be eating the plastic? No, because it's not food. Right? That's kind of what they're saying. And when they say things like acetaldehyde, that's the thing what they're saying, which is damaging to organs in higher concentrations. It's a primary breakdown product of ethanol in the body. You get more of acetaldehyde from a single beer than they produce in their entire paper. And that was messing up 6 bowls. 6 plastic bowls. Basically, don't eat the plastic bowl. That's what the study is saying. And the study is not saying don't use the plastic bowl for food stuff. It's saying don't eat the thing. Don't mush it up. Don't mush it up or grind up a plastic soup bowl and then eat it. That is pretty much all that is. So, I will link to the study. You can use the existing plastic bowls that you have, right? It's completely fine. There's no problem at all. This is why reading a study, if you're able to read the study, always have a quick scan through the study. And usually in the last paragraph or so, you don't need to read the entire thing, right? If I'm looking at this, Abstract, sample preparation, who gives a crap? Discussions and conclusions is, well, what is that, 2 pages? Yeah, basically the bottom. You just go to the bottom of any study and, to the discussion conclusions, and you have a quick look there, and that will give you an idea as to what the studies really say, rather than even if you can't be bothered reading the methodology and all that sort of stuff. And when talking about studies in people, you just look at the numbers of people that they studied, and if you find it's a small case study, again, you can just take it with a pinch of salt, right? In this case, read the last bit. Always read the study, never read the headline. Eating a plastic bowl will be very, very bad for you. That's pretty much what the study says. Anyways, that's me done for another week. We're 25 minutes in. I've got a lovely bit of music coming up from a very talented young man called Brian Brown. It's called Early Bird. It's a phenomenal little rapper, this. I really like this guy. Anyways, give it a listen. Peter at healthypostnatalbody.com. If you have any questions or comments, or want to send me an email or whatever, you want to be a guest. Like I said, I've got tons of interviews coming up with some really, really cool people. So, hang around. Check it out next week, right? You have a tremendous week and take care of yourself. Bye now.
Hey, waiting to get right, only leave you left behind. Up goes the early bird soaring down. Scrounge around for whatever worms might be obtainable. Never knew who flew about theirs first. So what's available, not a lot it seems. What you gonna do for it? Anything all means. Type of dedication you gotta have as you're blazing the path. Never know who trailing, you're hoping to get familiar with the ways of the things that we do. Ball hard and hold everyone who here accountable. Speaking up, stack it up till it's high as the stars in the skies. Always told to shine bright, you see it in my eyes. Ooh, we found high among the lows, yeah. Ain't no stopping in, so we don't go. There's no slowing down, no, not right now. Cause the ways of the things that we do. Ball hard and hold everyone who here accountable. Speaking up, stack it up till it's high as the stars in the skies. Always told to shine bright, you see, yeah. I've been starting with the one looking right at me. Slipping at a high rate, moonwalking, backtracking. Clear as black and white, sometimes we need a break. Human nature don't wanna be here and get away. But I think it's time for me to start something. Being the change you wanna see, thrilling thinking of it. Got to be there in the well, however feels fitting. And they'll remember the time you chose to make a difference. We found high among the lows, yeah. Ain't no stopping in, so we don't go. There's no slowing down, no, not right now. Cause we ain't got time at all, no. Ain't no stopping in, so we don't go. There's no slowing down, no, not right now, cause we ain't got time at all, no. Ain't no stopping in, so we don't go. There's no slowing down, no, not right now, cause the ways and the things that we do. Ball hard to hold everyone to hear accountable. Speaking up, stack it up till it's high as the stars in the sky. Always told to shine bright, you see it in my eyes.